All right, this is college football and stuff. We're here on week 5. I'm going to be covering all of the SEC games in this video, so I hope you enjoy it. All right, going to jump right into the games. So all these games are on Saturday. Starting off, the first game, we have Missouri at Tennessee, 12 o'clock on the SEC network. Now, of course, Missouri lost pretty big to Alabama last week, but no one really surprised by that, probably. Tennessee had a decent but close win over South Carolina. I think that was a good win for them. I think they really needed to get that win because it was going to be a tough season for them if they're going to lose to South Carolina. They got a bunch of good teams they got to play, and they really need to be able to beat the teams like South Carolina if they're going to be able to have a good season. The line I saw had Tennessee being an 11.5-point favorite. Now, I like Tennessee in this game. I think they win, but 11.5 points is a good number of points. So Missouri, and I think we saw this against the Alabama game. Now, again, Alabama could have won that by a lot more, pulled most of their starters in the second half, were playing third stringers in the fourth quarter. Really, that game was probably like a 35-3 win, Alabama, if they play their starters the whole time and just sort of run out the clock at the end, gave up some points at the end of the game there. That was really from having young players in and Missouri still having their main offense in. Now, all that said, Missouri has a decent offense. So statistically, they are essentially Auburn from last year. So not an amazing offense, but definitely not a terrible one. So I think they're going to be able to score some points. They run a nice zone read offense there. So I'm taking Tennessee to win this game, but give me 11.5 points on Missouri. I think they keep it a little bit closer than that. I could see Tennessee winning by 10 points here, but I'm taking Missouri with the spread there. Next up, we have South Carolina at Florida, also at 12 o'clock. This one on ESPN. Florida looked really good last week. I'm sure you've heard people talking about it. Absolutely amazing on offense. I think Kyle Trask had 5 touchdowns in that game. Got some extremely high-level play out of a tight end that they have there. A big guy seems just about impossible to cover, or at least he was for Ole Miss, but I think he's going to be a big threat all season for Florida. Now, some things I saw in that game. Florida still struggling to run the ball. Did not run the ball well against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is okay on defense, but not great. Definitely not one of the top SEC teams like you're going to see in Georgia, in Alabama, and hopefully Auburn on the defensive side of the ball. Also, Florida gave up a good bit of points there, and watching that game, I saw quite a few, it seemed like, wide open Ole Miss receivers. Now, I know Lane Kiffin is good at setting up an offense. I know he's going to be able to scheme well and get the most out of his players, at least on the offensive side of the ball. But still, it seemed a little bit too easy on a few of those drives, and Ole Miss put up a bunch of points. Florida needed almost all of those to cover the spread, and they ended up doing it. But I would have been a lot more comfortable if I was a Florida fan if that game had been a 35-10 victory rather than a 55-35, whatever it actually was. So that's a bunch of points to give up. Now, I don't think that's going to matter in this game because South Carolina is just not very good on offense. And this has been an issue with Will Muschamp coach teams. He always plays well on defense. He has good defensive players. He has a great scheme for the defense. But offenses have struggled everywhere he's been a head coach. So I don't think you're going to see any of those defensive issues that we saw week 1 with Florida in this game, and I don't know if it's really going to tell us anything about Florida's defense. Florida's going to need to clean up that defense, though. They're going to be able to score points on people. But if they want to win the East and if they want to get into the playoffs, they're going to need a better defense than they showed against Ole Miss. So I saw Florida a 17.5-point favorite, and I have them covering that spread. Again, I think South Carolina, a team with a good defense and not a great offense, I don't think they match up well against Florida. It seems like Florida is going to be able to put up points, and I really see South Carolina struggling to keep up with Florida in this game. So I have Florida winning, and probably winning pretty big. I think 3 touchdowns is reasonable there. But yeah, Florida covering that 17.5. Texas A&M at Alabama, 3:30 on CBS. So Alabama, I saw a 16.5-point favorite here. And Alabama looked really good in that first game. Of course, the Bryce Young, their true freshman quarterback, looks like he needs a little bit of time, but that should be expected. And good news for Alabama, they have Mac Jones, who looked really good. Najee Harris looks like a top-tier running back. I think you're going to see Alabama be more of what they were a few years ago, before the, I guess, like Tua era. They are going to be much more of a just pounded out, power run team. They're going to score less points overall, but games are going to be much less in question. They're going to have a dominant defense. They are going to hold people to low-scoring games, and they're going to be able to grind out possessions with that run game. They have an absolutely amazing offensive line. Saw them working some huge holes for those running backs in that game against Missouri. Alabama is going to be tough for people to beat this year. I think they should absolutely be the favorite to win the SEC, and of course, I'm sure they are. I think they are probably better than Clemson, making them the best team in the country right now. And I think, looking back to Florida, if Florida meets Alabama in the SEC championship game, that Florida team I saw, even though they looked really good on offense, I think Alabama would beat them. And I think it would come down to Alabama's defense being that good and their running game being good enough just to limit the number of possessions that other teams have. Other teams are not going to have a lot of opportunities to score points. They're going to have to be really explosive on offense, and I think Alabama is going to limit that. Texas A&M, now, that was a game I missed on last week. I had Texas A&M covering the spread. They had a pretty big spread against Vanderbilt, and I think the loss looks worse than it really was for them. So they are a significantly better team than they looked against Vanderbilt, I think. They have some issues. So they had a lot of turnovers in that game, a lot of fumbles, and that really killed drives, similar to the Auburn Kentucky game. Texas A&M absolutely dominated the stat sheet there, but couldn't finish drives, kept fumbling the ball. They scored on 3 of the 5 offensive possessions they had that didn't end in a fumble or the end of a half. That's a really good ratio. And if they had not fumbled on those games, they would have gotten a couple more scores, and this would have looked like a much less competitive game. So I think the score really lies to you a little bit in that game. Now, all that said, it's hard with the style of football I think Alabama's going to be playing this year to have them cover large spreads. So I think 16.5 is a good point spread for them. They're going to be able to limit Texas A&M's offense. Texas A&M has weapons. I think they're going to be a good team towards the end of the year. I think they need a little more time to get everything together. And Alabama is just that good. And I don't think we're going to see Alabama playing their third, fourth string players in this game. They're going to have their first team in the whole time. They get a good win. All right, Ole Miss at Kentucky, 4 o'clock on the SEC network. So I saw Kentucky as a 6.5 point favorite. Now this was a really tough game for me to pick. So Kentucky looked good against Auburn. They actually won the stat sheet. They should have won that Auburn game. And if it wasn't for the turnovers, that probably missed touchdown that I think really hurt their momentum and hurt them mentally as a team, made it tough for them to get back into the game, probably made them make some mistakes later on. I think Kentucky could have very easily won that game. So this was a really tough one for me to pick. I think Ole Miss is going to put up points. But I can see this game going very similar to the Auburn-Kentucky game, where Kentucky is able to extend drives, able to limit the number of possessions that Ole Miss gets, and if Kentucky can take care of those turnover issues, which are really a fluky thing, you typically don't see teams have streaks with turnovers as far as game-to-game goes. And they're super hard to predict. But so I think if Kentucky can take care of that, I think they get a win. I can see them winning by a touchdown here. I have them covering that 6.5. Again, really tough game for me to pick. I think Kentucky wins it. Now, do they win by 4 points? Do they win by 3 points? Very possibly. Ole Miss could win this game as well. Ole Miss is going to be able to score points on people. But I think Kentucky does just enough to get the win and cover here. All right, next up, Arkansas at Mississippi State, 7:30 on the SEC alternate channel. So, of course, Mississippi State coming off that huge upset win of LSU. We'll see if people have Mississippi State overvalued because of that win. I think it was a great win for them. 600 yards passing in that game, an absolutely ridiculous number, SEC record. When that Michael Leach offense is working, it works really well. But we saw this when he was in the Pac-12 at Washington State. They played the University of Washington every year, and it seemed like every year that University of Washington defense absolutely shut down his offense. So it can be done, and I think it's one of those things where if you shut it down a little bit, it completely falls apart. I think the quote from one of the Pac-12 defensive coordinators was, "There's no backup plan in Mike Leach offense. Either it works or you get nothing out of it." Now, against Arkansas, that's not going to matter. I have Mississippi State covering those 18 points. I think Arkansas is going to continue to struggle. But we will see later on in the season when Mississippi State plays some more complete defenses, and I'll talk about what I mean by that when I talk about the LSU team in a little bit. But we'll see later on how that Mississippi State team looks. They looked really good in that first game. When it comes to teams like Alabama, I don't think they're going to have anywhere near that same amount of production. All right, Auburn at Georgia, 7:30 on ESPN. This is a huge game, Deep South's oldest rivalry, being played super early on in the year this year because of all the COVID craziness. Georgia did not look great, especially in the first half against Arkansas. Really troubling for them. They struggled to run the ball against Arkansas, which has an absolutely terrible run defense. So that should be a big worry for Georgia. They have a ton of talent on the lines and at running back. Now, they lost some talented people on the offensive line. I don't know if that's the issue, but it definitely could be. They did not run the ball well against Arkansas, and they really should have. Now, Georgia has an absolutely disruptive defense. They have an excellent defensive unit. It's going to continue to be excellent. I didn't see anything that really made me think that it wouldn't. Felipe Franks hit one nice pass where he rolled out of the pocket, escaped some pressure, and threw a good completion, and that was pretty much it for Arkansas's offense in that game. Now, quarterbacks on Georgia, neither of the people who played last week looked good at all. Mathis does not look like he's the option. The Stetson Bennett, the former walk-on, who's now a scholarship quarterback, won the game for him, so he got him the win, but I don't think he's a good long-term option for Georgia there at quarterback. Now, JT Daniels has been cleared. Is he going to play this week? If he does, I think that's a nod in Georgia's favor. He's probably worth a little bit of points there on this overall game just because he, I think, is, regardless of how he plays, I think he's going to be better than either of those other two quarterbacks. Auburn. Again, similar theme here for several of these SEC teams. Florida, Georgia, and Auburn all seem to struggle to run the ball in that first game. Did not run the ball well against Kentucky very, very well at all. Some things I liked. The secondary played really well. A lot of young guys out there, and I thought they did a really good job. Of course, the linebacker core looked really good. Lines looked decent. Better than I thought probably the O-line would look, and the D-line looks pretty good. Of course, I expect them to take a step back from where they were last year, losing so much talent on that line, but they looked good. They looked good enough, I think, for Auburn to do well, especially with how well I saw the secondary play. That made me feel a lot better. Auburn still has issues getting off the field on third down. It was a huge issue last year. I saw it again in this Kentucky game where they would get teams into a third and long, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, and Kentucky several times was able to move the chains and get first downs on those 3rd and long situations, and Auburn has got to be better at that. All right, so yeah, I saw Georgia a 6.5-point favorite. I would like this better over 7 points, but I'm going to take Auburn with that 6.5 here. Again, I don't think, I'm not betting on any of these games, full disclosure, but if I was betting, I would not be betting this game. I think this game to me is a 20-17, 20-14 type game. And it could go either way. Low-scoring games like that, defensive games, one fumble, one interception, one breakout play is all it takes, and you have won that game with that single play. And so that is a huge risk there, but I'm picking all these games. I'm picking them against the spread. I am taking Auburn with the points. I think Auburn has a good chance of winning that game, but definitely give me those 6.5 just in case. All right, last up we have LSU at Vanderbilt. So that's 7:30 on the SEC network. So LSU I had as a 20-point favorite in the spread I saw. Now, spoiler alert, I am taking LSU to cover that. So you may be surprised at that based on that big loss to Mississippi State, but Vanderbilt is not a great team, especially on defense. And I think LSU is going to have a little bit of a comeback from that game. It was a big loss. I think they're going to be hungry. I think Vanderbilt is a good team for them to have sort of a comeback with, because I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be a great team this year. Probably the worst defense in all of the SEC. A good opportunity for LSU to go out and score some points and sort of get some confidence back. Now, I think a big part of their issues in that Mississippi State game, they switched from a 3-4 to a 4-3 defense this year, bringing in Bo Pelini, who has not been a defensive coordinator in quite a while. Was the head coach at Nebraska, then the head coach at Youngstown State after that. And I think they don't really have the personnel you want to run that 4-3 scheme, especially at the defensive end position. Their guys aren't quite fast enough or athletic enough to get pressure coming around the edge like that. as far as their defensive ends go. I think that's going to be an issue for them later on in the season, especially in things like the Florida game where I'm expecting a shootout-esque thing. I think Florida's going to be able to score enough points to keep LSU put away. Now, I think LSU is going to be able to get some confidence back in this game again. I think they're going to make a bit of a comeback, so I have them covering those 20 points. I think probably people are overreacting a little bit to that Mississippi State game. Now, it's a great win for Mississippi State, an absolutely amazing performance by the quarterback, but I don't think necessarily that is going to be the LSU team we see all year. I think LSU is going to have some struggles, though, not necessarily in this game. Again, I think this game is going to be a pretty easy win for them, but I think a lot of games that people assumed LSU was going to be dominant in are now big question mark games. So, of course, the Alabama game, the Florida game. I think the Auburn game is looking like a toss-up right now. I think there's a few more games in the West here that LSU probably thought coming into this season were going to be gimme wins that definitely are not going to be. So LSU is going to be a team to watch, if nothing else than to see sort of how far they fall. I can see them going 5-5, 6-4, maybe even 4-6, which would be a huge deal for a team, a defending national champion. So we'll see how that goes the rest of the season. Otherwise, that's all I have for the SEC games this week. If you liked this video, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see some more previews, and I will see you in the next video.